Today on the podcast, Jack and I discuss the advantages of all of the surface area available to bettors this time of year, open up the mailbag to answer your questions from our Discord, and if you stick around to the end of the episode, find out how you can get yourself some free Unabated swag. It's a great show. Let's get to it.
If the guy goes unabated, that's the new word, unabated. That's too big a word. That's like mayonnaise. I'm assuming that's the biggest word I know.
Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the Unabated podcast. I'm Thomas Viola, and joining me, as always, Mr. Unabated himself, back in action, Captain Jack. How are you doing, Jack? We had a fantastic conversation last week, but this week, just riding the two of us here on the show, and it gives us actually a little time to catch up here because you've been a busy guy, even though you've been working like all the real G's do as lasagna, moving in silence.
Oh, wow. I did not see that intro coming. I took a little break from social media and I've been focusing on content. I figured I need to look, there's something I always tell people when they're having some struggles in sports betting, and that is narrow your focus. I was having some struggles and I need to narrow my focus. So my focus is narrowing in on producing the best content available out there for people, not only who are subscribers to Unabated, but sports bettors. So I had a new article come out this week. I thought it was a pretty good article in going through some of the basics of perceived value. So we everybody knows about expected value, and then there's actual value. But what about perceived value? Because perceived value is what people tell you it's supposed to be, or what you perceive it to be. And sometimes that's not really based in fact or in reality. And so it was a kind of an article on how to see through some of the perceived value that's around the industry. And also was a little bit of a dig in that article towards the sharp sports books, who I think are doing a lousy job of trying to tell everyone that their product is the promotion, that their price has promotional value. That's not quite the case. Like you gotta play the game just like everybody else does, and you better be showing people what the value is of your product beyond just having a better price than other people, because obviously the American consumer so far has not been price sensitive. So trying to compete on price is not always the best option. So hopefully there's a little bit of a wake up call to some of the sharper operators out there, which I respect, but I also want them to, step up their game a little. And then the other thing is I put out another YouTube video just a couple days ago, and I've got two more that are in production right now, coming out soon. So just kind of getting back into what I think I'm probably best at, which is creating content and maybe staying away from some of the things that maybe I'm not so good at.
Well, I mean, like you said, narrowing your focus is important, and focusing in on the things that you are good at is definitely a good way to get back in the groove, especially if you're feeling in a funk and, hey, the weather's turning. It's getting to that kind of time anyway where people can be getting into a funk. I know I've been in one when it comes to the betting over the last couple of weeks here, man. The NFL teaser game has been rough the last 2 weeks. I've been hemorrhaging money, but it's not like it's minus EV. The bets that I'm playing teasers at a price where it is still plus EV to be playing them. I'm longing everything up. It's just been some of the games have not gone our way. And I think part of that is I did a better job of it this week, and it still didn't matter, but diversifying, making sure that you're not too exposed on one game, because a couple weeks ago when the 49ers lost to the Browns, I definitely had too much in that game. And like I could identify that, and I changed it up this week. It didn't help, but I think that was definitely something I needed to focus a little more on, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, look, teasers have variance, and you're betting into things. I think I've seen your bet slips. You're betting 3-team plus 170, which is a pretty good price these days, but you're still betting into something plus 170. And even though I think your expected win rate is probably right around 40%, that's still 40%. That's not, that's not tipping past 50%. So you have to realize that some weeks you're just going to take the worst of it. I think it'll even out in the long run. So as long as you keep your eyes on the horizon, you should be fine. But yeah, no, I feel for you, Tom. Teasers can bite hard sometimes.
Yeah, it's the struggle, but hey, we're entering such a fantastic betting season. There's so much going on right now. NBA has tipped off. The puck has dropped on the NHL season. I don't know if anybody knows this, but the reigning champion, Vegas Golden Knights, are doing pretty hot to start their season. I'm happy about that so far, but it's been it's a fun time for betting. It's a fun time for expanding some horizons. I know we just got done talking about narrowing your focus, but I'm looking forward to getting into NBA props this season, to even getting into maybe some NHL markets. And that does bring us into the mailbag here a little bit that we want to get to today. We're going to be answering some questions from people in our Discord. But my first question for you comes in the form of a question from me. And that is, when it comes to betting on some of these sports, taking that top down approach, everything is on the table right now, but are there some sports that you should really be staying away from, some sports that you should be betting more into? Like, when it comes to market efficiency here, can you top down NHL versus top downing NBA, which is a much more efficient market? Like, what are the things that you're looking at when you're taking a top down approach here this year?
So yeah, it's a great time of year to be a top down better, but you have to understand that not top down betting is not just staring at an odds screen and and firing. You have to understand the markets, because when you understand the markets, you understand when the inflection points of the market are. For instance, you mentioned NHL versus NBA. Well, the NBA is a much more efficient market than the NHL, but you also have to consider we're still early in the NBA season. Markets tend towards efficiency not only over the course of a game, but over the course of a season. So we're still early season in both the NBA and the NHL. You have to factor that in, that things might not be as quite as efficient as they will be down the line. And then the NBA and the NHL. So the times of day when the NBA board is going to really jump around are different than the times when the NHL board is. So the NBA is all about effective removal. If a player is injured in the NBA, he's one of maybe 11 people on the team. He's one of 5 starters. It's a much bigger impact into the line for a team if a star player is out than in the NHL, where really the only player that is of big impact is the goalie. So for the NBA, when we know who is going to play or not play in the game of that night, that's when the market starts to pivot, move around, and shape itself. And that's when maybe limits will go up once they know what the lineup will be. In the NHL, it's when we know who the starting goalie is going to be. Sometimes that hand is tipped early. Sometimes that hand is tipped late. Likewise in the NBA. Sometimes we know early that a star player is going to be in or out of the game. Sometimes it's a game time decision. It seems like everybody seems to be a game time decision these days. So you need to know just those basic facts about those two markets. And then we still have all the other sports that are going on right now. The NFL, college football, baseball still wrapping up here. College basketball is just about to start. You need to know the inflection points. You need to know when the markets are moving. And if you don't know that when you're approaching top down, you're not getting the whole picture. And you really need the whole picture in terms of market movement to practice top down efficiently.
Yeah. And by the way, in hockey in particular, for people that might be interested out there, usually the indicator that I'm using for who's going to be the starting goalie tonight is whoever's first off the ice in morning skate. That's normally the player that's going to be starting in goal that night. As far as the NBA, I don't know how much you've been following the early season here. There was an interesting rule change that has brought a little bit of a wrinkle, because they don't want players, they don't want teams resting players. They want to encourage their stars to be playing. And so the league made a rule change about how they can load manage players and how they can rest stars. And teams have promptly given the middle finger to the NBA so far this season. The Suns managed to rest all of their stars within the first 2 games of the year. It's been incredible so far, watching these antics with these teams, because it's been absolutely absurd, and somehow it's only gotten more absurd.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get into some questions from the Discord here. We're going to start off Larry 696. He has an NFL question for us.
That's my favorite Larry, by the way, is Larry 696.
One of my top 3, I'd say 305 and 402, both also fantastic Larrys. True. So Larry wants to know, how do you factor in coaches' decisions at the end of games? He's had a couple bad beats in the past years that would have been pushes or wins, but coaches going for two down 8 late really changes things. How do we account for that? And I think a big part of what he's talking about is the new analytical trend. And you see it with the new wave coaches. If you're down by 2 scores, you go for two when you're down by 14, you go for two after scoring the first touchdown. You're either going to be down 8 or down 6. Old school coaches very much just kick the extra point there. It's part of the new wave of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
How do you factor in these coaches' decisions? Because let's face it, a whole lot of coaches just make terrible decisions.
Yeah, you don't. That's variance, Larry. That is the name of the game. Like, hey, I'm not being unsympathetic to you because I can actually be empathetic to you. Because last week in Circa Millions, the unabated entry had Washington plus 6.5. And you're like, Washington plus 6.5. Well, we wanted a little bit of contrarian swing against the rest of the market. We figured a lot of people would be on Philadelphia minus 6.5. Well, it came a situation where Washington was down 14 points. They scored a touchdown, and Riverboat Ron decided not to gamble. He decided he'd just kick the extra point, even though the new age of analytics says you go for two there so that you know what you need on the second touchdown if you were able to get that. Anyway, so yes, Larry, I can relate to that, but this is variance, man. This is the way it is. Like, and when you think about it, the odds of we'll just talk about the 2-point conversion real quick. The odds of making a 2-point conversion are around like 48%, and the odds of making that 1-point kick are around 92 to 94 or 5%, rough numbers. Anyway, these equal out to pretty much the same expected point amount, about 1 or a little less than 1. And so when you think about it, that's the definition of variance. The end result is still the same. The end result is that it's worth about 1 point, but sometimes it's worth 2, sometimes it's worth 0. It works itself out in variance. That all comes out in the wash in the long run. And that's how you overcome variance, is you make more positive EV bets so that the long run happens sooner. And that's the basic answer.
Now, I'm sure that if you were trying to bottom up and trying to build a model, I'm sure you could have some way of mathematically quantifying, okay, well, this coach makes these decisions, this coach makes these, but I feel like that might be getting you into the weeds on what a model that someone like Rufus was running.
Yeah, I mean, if you're to that point of minutia in your model making, congratulations, because you must have a fantastic model to have now been boiled down to this kind of minutia. But honestly, if you're wasting time with this, look, there's easier money to be found elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Now, one quick addendum or add-on that I have for you, just from my own thoughts here. Do you think as the old guard of coaches moves out and newer, more analytical focused coaches move in who are paying attention to these things and who are doing things like going for 2 down 8 in those scenarios, do you think that we'll see a shift in key numbers as we see maybe a shift in scoring accounted for by teams being more aggressive, or not really, just because of the way the base 7 scoring system works?
Yeah, I lean towards not really. What would change the dynamic is if we made the 2-point try more certain. So in other words, if there was a brotherly shove or tush push equivalent in 2-point scoring, so that every time people go for 2, they make it, or they make it like 90% of the time, that would shift things. But right now, as I kind of explained, they're equivalent almost. The odds of making that kick and the odds of making that 2-point conversion work out to roughly 1 expected point. But if something changes in the approach to scoring those points, then that would shift the distribution of point scoring.
All right, I want to move on to the next question, but one more point here that I'm curious
Okay.
about your thought on. I've thought about this too much, but if we were to have a coach who maybe shifted their fundamental philosophy and said, we're not kicking extra points, we're going for 2, do you think that something like that would also increase the conversion rate? Because all of a sudden you have a team that knows they're going for 2. They're probably practicing these scenarios more than other teams are.
It could.
It wouldn't do enough to change a key number, but
right. There was a rule change floated a couple of years ago to make the 2-point conversion happen from the 1-yard line instead of the 2-yard line. And the teams actually, I think it just narrowly was defeated, but the teams that were opposed were like, no, this is going to make every touchdown be a 2-point try. It's going to take kicking the extra point out of the game because you'd go for 2 all the time. Why wouldn't you? So again, like that would be the only time that it would change if there was a rule change. Now, if there was just a team that always went for 2 for some weird reason, I guess, but like that would only be affecting that one team. It wouldn't affect the entire league. Now, if the whole league followed it, like we're kind of seeing with the brotherly shove,
It's a copycat league.
And it is a copycat league that like that could change things, but so far we haven't seen it. So, hey, what do I always tell you, Tom? Whenever you ask me a question in sports betting theory, it depends, man. So it depends if we do rule changes, if we have some lock play that everyone can do, then that would change things.
Yeah, it's a fun thought exercise that I've thought of. Like the same thing with what if more teams went for it on 4th down? Like, could you imagine if we had an offense that was based around a base 4 instead of base 3 system? Of they were just always in the mentality of we're going for it on 4th, and how that might change the way they play call. Just stuff like that. I like thinking about that when I have too much time on my hands. But let's move on to another question here. We've got one from Pete in the Discord who wants to know, how does one connect with individuals/groups looking for accounts? And can you go into detail on how those arrangements typically work? Are plays sent out to the original account holder that they're expected to place to avoid teleporting? If someone's logged in on one app and all of a sudden their geolocator's pinging, or is full control seeded? It seems like one of the more interesting subgenres of this world. I mean, a lot of it is how do syndicates work and how does one get involved in one?
Yeah, so we did a podcast about this some time ago. Maybe you can look up which show that was. Not that we number our shows. I just realized that. Well, again, I'm going to answer with the same kind of answer. It depends. Like different syndicates, different groups, different setups are all different. And there's no like one size fits all with any of this stuff. So the question is, how does one network in with a group or something like that? And it sounds like he's one of these people that wants to get in because he has some accounts that he wants to make available to a betting syndicate. I mean, you look, there's plenty of guys that are promoting themselves everywhere saying, hey, if you have accounts, let me know and I can make you money on them. All of those guys act differently in terms of how they handle their business. Just be careful. And, one of the key points that I said when we've talked about this before is start small. You don't have to like give away the store to somebody and then, put up $50,000 of your own money to this person you don't know. You start small and build the trust. That's the best way they should handle it too. If somebody comes in and they're just willing to blindly trust you with all of this, either capital or they want you to trust them as much as they seem to trust you, that throws up a little bit of a red flag. But if you can just start small and build your trust over time, then you create meaningful relationships. But I want to say something else to Peep. I think there's a lot of value in networking with people. That's one of the big mistakes I've made in my betting career, was not networking with more people earlier on. But I also think it's a business. Don't mistake joining some kind of syndicate or some kind of group as now you have new friends. They're not your friends. They're your business partners. And it's a business relationship. And you might be, your worth might be exhausted to them in some time. Like, for instance, if your accounts all get cut off and then they're done with you. Don't expect this, like you now made some new lifelong friends. I have a lot of friends I've made in the business over the years, but I also have a lot of people that I was just a business contact with. And, then we went our separate ways. So just be careful how you're getting yourself involved here and what you're really looking for.
Yep. Those are very wise words to heed indeed. Coming next from Amber Gambling, 2 questions here. 1, when you're building a model, do you look at the odds first, or do you build the model first and then see what answer it gives independently? This is kind of a chicken and egg scenario.
Right. Neither. You start with a hypothesis. I'm a big fan of the scientific method. I think that goes a long way in solving logic puzzles, including sports betting. And the first thing you say to yourself is, is this bet beatable, and how could this bet be beatable? And when I talk about building a model, I often talk about building a model to answer a simple question, not answering a large question. It's how many yards will this running back get this week? Build a model to that. Will this team win this week? That's a much harder model to build. So you start with that narrowed focus, and you start with your hypothesis, and then you try to prove that hypothesis. And that's where I think you need to begin. And it's not so much a matter of, I think what Amber's saying here is, do you start by seeing what the odds are that are out there and let that shape what your model should become? Or do you start with the model and see independently what it says of the odds that are out there? It's probably more the latter. You definitely want to start with your hypothesis, then build your model to answer the question. But when you get that answer, you need to be respective of what the market says. We hear this all the time, right? If your model says that the market is wrong by 40% and it's some efficient market, chances are you're wrong, not that the market's wrong. So you do need to factor in the market. And there's in the book Building Excel Sports Betting Models by Andrew Mack, he mentions the Bill Benter effect. And what Bill Benter did was he would have the market kind of help blend in the Benter blend into his model to kind of right size it. And I'm a big fan of that. I've been kind of pushing that some of our tools at Unabated should blend in the market more than they do. So yeah, kind of a long rambling answer. And I think my answer to Amber would be, you start with the hypothesis, you go through the scientific method. At some point, that's going to be the model independent of the market, but then you're going to have to factor in the market after that.
That makes sense. She has a follow-up question for you, but when you were doing trend analysis, and it's hard because trends are very different, but essentially what makes you decide between this is just signal and this is noise? How do you parse that when looking at things that are popping up and you're recognizing a pattern in a bet?
Yeah. So trend analysis is sort of like this danger zone of sports handicapping, because there's too many people that read too much into trends. And the biggest thing with trends is signal versus noise, right? And that's kind of what she's saying there too. That also comes down to the scientific method, because you need to take a hypothesis of what you believe to be the signal in this trend and see, does that hold water? Just an example off the top of my head, up until last month, as you are well aware, Thomas, the Jets had never beaten the Eagles in the regular season. And then the Jets won this year. But this Jets team this year and this Eagles team this year had really never played each other. And they only play each other every 4, 5, 6 years, whatever it is for interconference play. And so the record of the previous decades of Jets teams and the record of previous Eagles teams was irrelevant. There was no reason why a team from Philadelphia had always beaten this team from New York. There's no science behind it. It was just serendipitous. It had happened. Now, conversely, there's good examples of like things that repeat over time in history across different teams as to why they have that effect. London games, okay?
And it's something that has an explanation. There's something that you can, yeah.
Right. So for a London game, does flying in early for the game and getting a week's worth of practice in that time zone difference, does that matter? Or can a team fly in the day before and just play it? Does that matter? And we've seen over time, like flying in earlier seems to have a better effect for the teams that are playing in the London games. But that's more of a signal. Like, even though the teams have all been different over the years, there is that common thread of, if you fly in early and you get your practice and acclimated to the time shift, it works better for you.
Yeah, and one of those examples is, of course, the Ravens, who, and I don't have the exact stats on their London record, but I know that the anecdote was that once upon a time when Harbaugh had his first London game, they got smashed and they had arrived late. And ever since then, he had made sure whenever they were playing in London, the team's travel plan was always to get there early, and they have had more success in London games since then. And similarly, also with the Ravens, their preseason narrative. The streak finally ended this year, but you can quantifiably explain the trend of the Ravens don't lose in the preseason because, well, they're literally the only team that we know is trying. We know for a fact that they go out and they play to win preseason games, whereas other people don't, and that helps explain their record in such games, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, by the way, one caveat to the London angle there is we live in an ever evolving society and air travel is evolving. So the quality of flight in 2023 is different than the quality of flight in 2005 or whenever we first started to play these London games. So there's that to be involved. There's, air cabin pressure does affect a body's rhythm. And, so anyway, there's a lot of science that goes into this and science is always evolving. So that might not be the best example of something that's a trend that has signal, because that signal could change based on a lot of evolving factors. But I think we're getting away from the point of Amber's question, which was, how do you identify signal from noise? And again, I just say the scientific method. Begin with a hypothesis, test your hypothesis, experiment on it, and then come up with a theory, and then verify that theory.
Mm-hmm. And as always, just bet on the trend of Travis Kelce overs when Taylor Swift is in attendance. All right. We have one more question here from Grizzly Blair in the Discord. And he wants to know, we can end on a great note here, of what is the dumbest/funniest mistake you've made as a sports bettor? This isn't your bad beat stories. This is just something like when he used to arbitrage, he would sometimes go bet both sides and accidentally bet the same side twice. And then he would promptly find out after the game that he had either won big or lost big when he thought he had a guarantee.
So if you're betting, you make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. Like, that's just life. If you don't think you're making mistakes, you're probably not paying close enough attention, because you are making mistakes. And I'm not sure anything involving money is ever funny to me. Like, it hasn't been funny. It's been my job. So mistakes are painful. But I will, you can look back and laugh at certain things, right? So my biggest boneheaded mistake ever, and I actually told this story to ESPN back in the day because it was related to parlay cards in Delaware. We did the Angle Autopsy a month or two ago, talked about how great it used to be betting these parlay cards in Delaware, and how there was a little bit of like the art of sports betting involved in order to get down on these parlay cards. But one of the things we would do, me and my friend Dan, who was my partner during all of this, we would go through and identify the teams we wanted to bet on. Now, a parlay card is sort of like the old Scantron test, where it's a long strip, and then each team has a number, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down the list. And then you fill the little circles in at the bottom, you tear off that ticket and you hand it in, they scan it through the machine. I'm kind of explaining things that don't need to be explained, but here's the problem. We had identified the 7 teams we wanted to play this week. And I remember one of them, number 4, was Denver. And then just below it on the list was another game as San Diego was playing somebody. This was back, it was still the San Diego Chargers. And they were number 6. And I went through and we were like, okay, we're going to play Denver. And I wrote down on my notebook, as we were kind of writing these all down, I wrote down 6 instead of 4. So when we went through, I had a little spreadsheet that worked out all the permutations of round robining all 7 of these teams. And I typed 6 into my program and got all the permutations with 6. And we filled out all these cards, which for 7 teams, I think the permutations are like 35 permutations of 3-team parlays. We filled in 6. Now, all day, I'm rooting for Denver. And this just happened to be the magical day, the first time in the 2 or 3 years that we had been doing this, where we went perfect. We went 7 for 7. And we, at the end of the day, I call up Dan and I go, oh, we did it. Like I think we had won like $120,000 or something like that each. And I went, at the end of the night, I get all my tickets and I'm separating them into my winners pile because I'm not cashing all these tickets all at once for various reasons. And I start going through and I see San Diego and I go, I don't remember San Diego today. And I look and I'm like, shoot, where's Denver? Where is Denver? And then that's when I realized I had put down San Diego instead of Denver. San Diego didn't win that day. Denver did. And so the $120,000 or so turned into like $25,000, which is still a good haul, but it's not a six-figure haul. So am I laughing about that? No, I'm not laughing about that all these years later, but that's probably the dumbest mistake I've ever made. And it was a six-figure mistake, unfortunately.
That is incredibly painful. I've definitely made a few mistakes. One thing that I bet on the Jets to win the Super Bowl this year. That's definitely up there for me. But one thing I'm surprised with myself is that I have never bet the wrong side.
Wow.
Yeah, somehow I have just not accidentally I've almost hit the wrong button, but I've never actually done it, at least as far as I can remember. But I do remember one time I used to have a friend. Well, I'm still friends with the guy, but he used to hit me up every week and go, "Hey, could you bet this NFL parlay for me?" Every week he would have NFL parlays he'd want me to make. Were they ever hitting? No. Would I have to go in, fund my app, do all the stuff just to lose his money, and every week think I should just take this action myself because he's not hitting? And finally, one week, I'm on the Westgate app. I'm building this parlay for him, and I put it in. And the Westgate app's a little funny where it doesn't clear out your bet slip. It just brings it back. And I thought I hadn't put it in. So I put it in again. And I realized I've just double bet this parlay. And now I'm riding this parlay. And that was when I was done with him. Because first off, it did not hit. And second off, I was like, here's a PPH guy. Call him. He's going to set you up with a book. Just do that. I don't want a part of this anymore. I'm out. And that was my dumbest betting story, I think, which I'll take. That is certainly a lot better than losing $100,000. Well, not winning.
I thought for sure that story was going to end and you decided to book it just this once, and that's the day he hit.
Oh, but, thank God, no.
Yeah. Okay. Well, too bad.
Yep. We'll take it. It was what it was. I could have had certainly plenty more losses than that. But Jack, that is going to do it for our questions here. That is going to do it for us. And you know what? If you've listened all the way to the end of this episode, I'm going to give out a free t-shirt. If somebody goes and rates our podcast 5 stars, Apple or Spotify, I'll be checking both. Rate it. You can shoot it to take a screenshot, send your rating to me, Twitter, TV at work, Discord DMs, any way that you can get a hold of me, send it to me. I'll get a free t-shirt to someone out of the drawing this week. But in the meantime, of course, as always, head to unabated.com. Check out all of the awesome tools that we have for you guys. Thank you so much for being here, listening to our pod. As always, we appreciate you. We appreciate everybody who sent in a question for the mailbag. We think we got to everybody. We apologize if we missed you. But other than that, best of luck this week, everybody. And as always, let's cash some tickets.